Welcome to News from the OData v4 model. This is a very short session, and so I will keep my introduction short and ask that you join me in welcoming our two panelists for this session, Lars Kissel and Mathias Uhlmann.
So, hello, I'm Mathias. With me is Lars. We are going to talk about news from the OData v4 model. So in the end, the features we developed in the last year that we see as important and wanted to show to you. So what's in it? So first Lars will talk about the latest binding capabilities. Then I will talk about aggregations, so data aggregation and recursive hierarchy. Finally, I will say some words about selection, and then there's time for Q&A. With that, Lars.
Yeah, so let's start with some of our latest binding capabilities in the OData v4 model. And here we'll talk now about the topics expensive properties, about the Upsert, and about one-way property bindings for objects. And let's start with the first topic and the question, what are expensive navigation properties? We define expensive navigation properties as navigation properties that take a longer processing time on the back end. To quickly demonstrate this, in my demo application, this is a simple sales orders app where you can see that it has a column for the shipment status, and the shipment status is taken from a third-party backend. And this is a little bit slower than other backends, so this is our expensive navigation property. And if we now refresh this application, you can see that it takes a lot of time to load the data and to show the table. You can see this is loaded with one batch request. And of course, if we continue with the paging, you can see it still takes a lot of time, and I'm pretty sure everybody of you knows that the end user of this app would not have fun to use it. So back to my slides. So for this scenario, we introduced a new binding parameter for the OData list binding, the so-called $separate. And this binding parameter allows to define one or many single-valued navigation properties, which then should be requested in parallel batch requests. The goal of this is simple. We want a better user experience by improving the app performance. So as sketched here on the slide, imagine there would be previously one list request for an entity set, which is requesting some selects and some expands. Then the expensive navigation property could be set in $separate, and this will lead to two batch requests. This first one as described for the simple normal selects and expands, and the second batch request, which is exclusively for loading the expensive navigation property. So let me show this in my demo app. So here's the list binding of the sales orders. And in $separate, we can now set the navigation property to shipment status and save it. And if we now refresh the table, we will see that the normal data will be quickly available while the expensive navigation property is still loaded in the background. Here you can see this leads to two batch requests, as described, the first one for loading the simple selects of this table, and the second one for requesting exclusively the expensive navigation property. And now, of course, we can continue paging, and you can see paging works pretty fast, and I think the end user will have a lot more fun than before. So back to my slide. Additionally to that, we also introduced a new event for the OData list binding, the so-called separate received event. This event is especially for freestyle app developers. So the app developer could, for example, use the event parameters property, start, and length, as you can see in this code snippet, to retrieve the data of the previously loaded expensive request, or could get the affected context to do any post-processing the app wants to do. Or another use case of this event is error handling. So in this event, there's also a parameter given the messages on error, and this contains all the error messages that would be provided by a failed expensive backend request. These error messages could then, of course, be used, for example, to show them in a message box or to do any other error handling. Then to the next topic, which is the upsert. And upserting means to create a new entity that is associated by a single valued navigation property. So let me quickly demonstrate this in my demo app. So here we can open one of the sales orders. And now you can see that here's a section with the payment information. And this payment information is currently empty, and this is because the payment info is a navigation property, but this instance does not yet exist on the back end. So the user could now set the status of the sales order to paid. It was paid, for example, yesterday. And if we now press the save button, we can see that there's one batch request, which now contains one upserting patch request, which goes to the toPaymentInfo navigation property. And this leads in the back end to a creation of a new payment info instance, and this is automatically referenced back to the current sales order instance. Additionally to that, you can see that there is a second request within this batch. So you see there is a GET request for refreshing the currently created payment instance. And this is on the one hand for getting the key properties of the new entity, and on the other hand, we want simply to reload it. So you can see the backend has created a payment reference for this payment info, and this is, of course, directly shown to the UI. So for us, it was very important to make this feature as easy to use as possible. So as you can see, the app only needs two-way bindings and no other APIs are needed. But optionally, app developers can also use the context APIs set property or reset changes to do their own implementation in the controller code. But this is only optional and you don't need to use them. So to the next topic, which is the OneWay property binding support for object values. And here I've prepared a small code snippet how such a property binding could look like. So this is a property binding to the address. The address is of type complex type, and this means that this complex type, this address, is on the client a simple object holding some address information. And the goal of this is, of course, that the given formatter function formats this address object. Previously, this was already supported for one-time bindings, but one-time means this binding would only be formatted once at the one time when this property binding was initialized for the first time. And now with the OneWay support, we will format this the simple property binding every time if there's any property change within this address object. So to simply show this in my demo application, here you can see on the bottom there's an address section. You can see below this address there's currently a null, which is the formatting of the current address because the address is not yet given. And if we now start to enter a street name, then you can see that this is started to be formatted. And of course, if we continue with the postal code, this is formatted. And of course, we can add a city for that. And with every property change, this formatter is called again. And yeah, I think that's already it from me. So I would hand over back to Mathias.
Thank you, Lars. Okay, so aggregations. Let's start with the data aggregation. So some of you might know that UI5, UIElements, and CapJava have been supporting a lot around data aggregation since a few years. Cup node and also RAP, they are catching up or have caught up. I think not everything, especially on the RAP side, is generally available, but this will come somewhere. Yeah. What was missing was that you couldn't filter by aggregated properties if you are using visual grouping or having a grand total, like you see here on the screenshot. And that's now there. Yeah, so that's available with 136 in the end. What we needed here was the ability to filter the raw data for the aggregated values on the leaf level. Yeah? And this requires a special construct in the $apply on the OData layer that's shown here. Yeah? And yeah, I mean, that's now there. Yeah? So when you're using cup or up, it should be opaque for you. Yeah, you don't need to do anything. It just is there. Then recursive hierarchy. So last year we've shown a lot around recursive hierarchies. A few things were still open. So first is expand, collapse a node completely. Now let me just do it the right way here to show things correctly. So this is the same application like last year. We have a hierarchy of employees. Yeah, so even then we could expand the entire tree. Now we could expand the single node. What we can do now as well is we can expand this node completely, which means that this node and all its descendants are expanded. If you're using the Fiori Elements building block, yeah, you get it for free. There's nothing you need to do there. It just comes out of the box. Now, you can also collapse this node entirely, but to show you what this means, let me just collapse it the normal way. So now it's collapsed, it's closed. I can open it again, and then you see all the descendants, they have the same expansion state as before. When I now select to collapse it entirely, then you see that when I expand it again, first there's a request, yeah, so we forgot obviously the data, and then just the next level is expanded. Okay, then next thing, so that's a bit inconvenient now, yeah, copy and paste of nodes. And then again, what does it mean? So we need to go to edit mode. Let me expand the entire tree. So I can just take a node here, say copy, and then select the parent the copy should have, say paste, and there we have a copy. Okay, let's save it quickly. Yeah, so that's there. Again here, if your backend has this copy action, yeah, then there's nothing you need to do on the UI. It's just there. And finally, there is the possibility to create the node in the backend position. So what does this mean? So typically, we would create a new node as the first among its siblings. So simply that the user can find the new node very easily. Yeah, that's the same like in a flat list, where a newly created node would be always on top. Yeah? But some of our applications wanted the node to be shown somewhere else, namely where the backend places it. Yeah? So there is a parameter on the model side, create in place. There is in the Fiori Elements building block, there is another parameter, create in place as well. Yeah? And with this, you can get to the in place creation. Now let's have a look here. Again, edit mode, on the entire tree, and then let's get back to the same node. And when I say now here create, then the new node is not the first sibling, it's where the backend placed it. Okay. So what else to mention here? So for the recursive hierarchy, if you're using an ABAP backend or if you're in Steampunk with the 25.02 release, everything is there. Yeah, so with 136 from UI5 and the 25.02 release from the ABAP guys, you should be fine to use everything. On the CAP side, their recursive hierarchy support is available as beta. And if you want to know more about this, and you're also here tomorrow, then tomorrow at 4, Olena, Yevgeny, and Adrian will have a talk about that. And I think you can ask them all the questions about how to do it in CAP. Yeah. Then next thing selections. So I guess a lot of you have worked with selections in the past, and if you think about OData v2 or also JSON, then typically the selection is managed by the table. So the table keeps count and remembers which contexts are selected. And this is now different in OData v4. Yeah? So the selection is now managed entirely by the OData model. You can still use the table APIs, but in the end, it's going down to the model. And there is a documentation linked here. You have some APIs. I just wanted to add two things here. One word of caution. Yeah? So while we can guarantee that you get these selected contexts, we cannot guarantee that the data is always up to date. Meaning, if we want to guarantee that the data is always up to date, we always need to reread all the data of the selected context when you do something like refresh your table. And there are at SAP some applications that do this quite extensively. So it becomes expensive if you do it for all the selected contexts. So the not just recommendation, yeah. So the instruction is you need to use the request methods when you want to access the data of the context. And then the second thing here is the vision part. So why are we doing this? So often, not always, often when you select context on the client, you actually want to do something in the backend. And if you want to do mass activities in the backend, then the current way of doing things seems a bit like a performance overhead, because nowadays what you do is you fetch these data to the client and then you trigger the activities in the backend. And the question is, why do you need to fetch all these data to the client? Yeah? And the OData v4 specification contains some answers there. And the answers are, you don't need to do it, because we give you filter segments. So if you have a collection, you can append a segment with a filter, and then you get back another selection which is filtered. Then you have something like the $each, which means you can perform something for every element of this collection. Or you can have collection-bound actions. And all of this means that when you know your filter, you can actually perform the mass activities very efficiently in the backend without loading all the data to the client. So that sounds really nice. The unfortunate message here is we know what we want to do, but we don't know when it will have the sufficient priority on our side, but also on the backend side to get it done. Yeah. But this is the driving cause, yeah, why we said we want to manage the selection at the OData model, because in the end, this is something the table cannot do. Okay, so then we are through with our content. Directly after lunch, there will be an expert corner where you can meet us. Yeah, if Q&A is not sufficient for your questions, we will talk about models. You have 5 types, formatters, localization content. This stuff we are responsible for. Yeah, and if you have a question where we cannot help you, then maybe we can guide you to the right guys. Then it's time for Q&A, but let me directly switch to the next slide so you have sufficient time to scan the QR code and provide feedback. Okay. Thank you.
We have about 4 minutes for questions.
Regarding recursive hierarchies, just a short question. I was wondering if it's possible also not only to copy and insert in a single node, but also a node including all the child nodes.
Yeah, actually this is what would happen.
Okay, cool.
So if it should happen exactly like this. To go there. Let me just. Unfortunately, so I was tricking here a bit because this is in the development landscape, at least the backend part, and they are having a small issue that was detected too late before UI5Con to get fixed. So I needed to do everything. Let's take this one because it's not so many. So if I take this and paste it here, all the child nodes should be copied as well. So that's there. Yeah.
Yep. All the way over here.
Rather a general question, because you're talking about batches and splitting up batches and so on. Just so you know, you are aware of the fact that the CAP framework handles batches sequentially. So my question is, would it not make sense to just in general disable batch request? Although I've been using batches myself all the time, I just figured this out recently. And that makes me wonder, it gave me a performance gain of more than 30 seconds by just disabling batches.
Yeah, I think, Walter, that's a question maybe you ask the CAP node guys tomorrow. Yeah, so
I already asked them the question, and they said batches shouldn't be used in that way.
Yeah, so maybe that's the first. We discussed this also internally because we also got tickets for that. The interesting part is only CAP Node did this parallelization. CAP Java never did. I think RAP, they also didn't do it.
Yeah.
So it was just something on the CAP Node side. At least for this ticket case, you could also question, okay, why is each of these requests taking so long? And I think that's also a valid question. Now, from our perspective, the batch requests. So if you're talking about draft, then we typically have stuff like we are doing a change in the backend, and in parallel we want to read side effects. So now we want to read these side effects after applying the patch. And there are in the end two options for that. One option is we use a batch request, and then we are sure first the patch is applied, and then come the get requests. Or we wait until the batch request with the patch returns, yeah, and then we do a second sequential request to read the side effects. And the second thing, it's not supported at all. Yeah, our model cannot do it, and I don't think it makes sense to develop it. Yeah, because simply from performance perspective, I think sequential requests, that really hurts. We don't want to have this. I think in total you have to say there's a lot of stuff we did in the previous 6-7 years where we didn't think about using individual requests. So typically it works with batch requests. And I think if you're stopping to use batch requests, I guess you could run into trouble. Okay. For this CAP node scenario, there's another thing that you could think about. What we do support is that you use different group IDs. So if it's different parts of your UI where these expensive GET requests are coming from, then what you could do since years already is to say, okay, maybe there's a main part that the user needs to see quickly, and that's also loaded quickly, and this you simply let run with $auto. But for the slower parts, you use different group IDs. If the names just start with $auto and then dot something, yeah, then you get parallel batch requests, but you're still using batch requests. Okay.
Thank you. That helps me a lot. Thank you.
We have our next session in this room in only 5 minutes, also with Mathias. And hopefully I'll see you there. Thanks very much.